All right, everybody, what's going on? And welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk. This is the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I'm your tour guide around the SWAC, see what's coming at you. And today we're going to finish our little returning player series. Today we're talking about the returning specialists for each team because special teams are vital. You know what I mean? I've seen games won and lost on special teams, not just, not just the points, but good punting, change of field position, that hidden yardage, all of that is from great special teams. And you're rarely going to find a good team with bad special teams. So we're going to kind of look at who's coming back for each team and, what's what. So with that being said, man, y'all hit those socials, Facebook is SWAC Talk, Twitter, SWAC Talk 76, Instagram, SWAC Talk. Like the video, feel free to comment and share your thoughts on this topic and what you're expecting from these guys in the upcoming season. Media Day is next week, so we'll have some coverage of that after the fact because we won't be there, but we'll be here. I might go live that night. I'm not quite sure yet, but we will have some content for y'all on Media Day, and also we're gonna have some college football 25 content coming at you a little bit. Definitely going to try to do a review on that. I am on Xbox, so if you want to get down, my name, my gamer tag is Sewell SWAC, all one word. So definitely you want to get down. After a while, man, I gotta get my game up. I gotta practice. I'm not jumping on the sticks right out the gate, but you give me a couple times to run through it and get myself right. We can get at it. So with that being said, man, like I said, like the video, share, comment. Subscribe, please, if you haven't done so already. Thank you in advance. Also, Thursday, Swag Smoke episode 150. We're going to try to have a good time with that. Like I said, we like to celebrate every 50th episode, so we're going to try to have a little fun with that. And let's jump into it, man. That's enough of the housekeeping. Let's jump into it. Of course, we're going to start off with the Bulldogs at Alabama A&M. And they had a pretty solid special teams unit last season. They returned both of their kicker and their punter, and that's something you're gonna see from a few teams on this list. Not very many teams are kind of starting over from scratch, and that helps a lot. But when you look at what the Bulldogs did last season, they were they were seventh in the league in field goals. They were 6 of 10. They made 60% of their field goals on the season. They were last in net punting. That's no, that's not. I didn't click that right. They were last in net punting. That's your punting average subtracted by your return yards. Return yards allowed. So they had 31.2 net yards per punt. Overall, they averaged 40 yards per punt as a team, which was fourth, but they gave up 88.5 yards per punt return. So they didn't really do a good job of covering punts and brutalized their net average. When they look at extra points, they finished the season at 40 or 41 for 97%. That was second in the league. One number I like to look at on kickoffs is touchbacks. They had 17 on the season, which was third. So they did a pretty good job with that. They kind of did a solid job with that. Their return unit was great in punt return. They averaged 16.1 yards per return, but that was basically because of Terrell Gardner, who is not there anymore. But he was a guy who could break a punt return. And he was a solid kickoff return man as well. They were seventh in returns on kickoffs at 17.4 yards per return. Looking at what they do return, Austin McReady is their punter. He was 38. He had 38 punts for 1,660 yards, 43.6 yard per punt average, with a long of 65. Had 12 punts inside the 20 and 13 50-plus yard punts. So he was definitely a guy that can flip the field for them. Victor Barbosa was their kicker. He was 6 of 9 on field goals with a long of 37, 39 of 40 on extra points for 57 total points. McCready had I think kid name was Luke Moffitt. He was their kickoff specialist. He went into the portal. McCready had 2 kickoffs last season for a 57-yard average, no touchbacks. And the return game had some big shoes to fill. Like I said, losing Terrell Gardner. DJ Moffitt was their leading kickoff returner. He had 7 returns for 104 yards, average 14.8 yards per return with a longer 21. And they don't have anybody returning their return punts. So those are spots that are going to be filled. Looking at Bama State, their special teams unit, I would say I would really say they were a mixed bag. They were 7 of 16 on field goals, only 43%. That was 10th in the league. They finished the season with a net punting average of 32.9, which was 8th in the league. They averaged 37 yards per punt as a whole. They only allowed 1.3 yards per punt return, which led the league. They did a very good job of covering punts, but they didn't really do a great job of actually punting the ball with a 37.2 average per punt, which was 9th in the league. So they did a good job of covering punts. They didn't really punt that well. Like I said, they were 26 of 29 on extra points for 89%. And then when you look at kickoffs, they finished the season with 17 touchbacks, like I said, and a net kickoff average of 39.6, which was 4th in the league. Their return game, they have a very, very solid return game. They led the league in kickoff returns at 20.7 yards per return with 1 touchdown. And they were 4th in punt returns at 13.2 yards per return with 1 touchdown. A name you need to remember is Robert McMinn. That guy is a great return guy. Should be first team all conference preseason in return game. 7 kickoff returns for 205 yards, had an 89-yard touchdown, averaged 29.2 yards per return. That's his kickoff return. And 28 punt returns for 369 yards, 13.1 yards per return, along with 54 and a touchdown. So that's two touchdowns for your team. That bonus when you have a great return game like that. That's definitely a game changer. That's a field changer. That's a possession changer. That's just a game breaker. The kicking unit itself was, like I said, was very hit or miss, but they returned Harrison Tucker, who was their punter. He had 45 punts for 1,670 yards, averaged 37.1 yards per punt, with a longer 61, 18 punts inside the 20, and 3 50-plus yard punts. Now, the kicking game, place kicking game was definitely erratic, to say the least. Jaden John was their guy. He's no longer there. Baylor Cannon is the returning kicker. He was 1 of 3 on field goals with a longer 34, 7 of 8 on extra points with a total of 10 points on the season. So they definitely have some holes to fill in the actual kicking game. They don't have anybody returning as kickoff specialists. So they have some serious holes to fill on a unit that really wasn't that great with the kicking part. But their return part of the special teams unit was great, and the coverage units were pretty solid. So the actual kicking part was where their issue was, and they had to get that right. Looking at the Braves of Alcorn, they finished the season with a net average of 31.4 yards per punt, net average that was last in the league. Only allowed 1.8 yards per punt return. They just didn't really punt the ball that great, 35.5 yards per punt on the season, which was last in the league. So they didn't really, and that can be a variety of factors. It could be a field position thing. It could just be, they didn't punt that great. There's various reasons why, those numbers are what they are. But when they did punt the ball, they covered it extremely well. 1.8 yards per return. When you look at extra points, they were fourth in the league at 96%, 27 of 28. Field goals, they were second in the league, 13 of 18 for 72%. And they led the league in net kickoff average at 41 yards per kick. And they also averaged 54.8 yards per kickoff with 4 touchbacks. Their return game was not a strength for them last season. They only averaged 16.5 yards per kickoff return, which was 11th. And they were last in punt returns on the season at 2.4 yards per return. Looking at what they do return, Noah Kiani is one of the better kickers in the league. He returns. They lost their punter, so that's a spot that they had to fill. They're going to have to find guys who can, help out in the return game. There's a lot of speed on that team, so I'm quite sure they can find some guys to fill those spots. They just didn't have a lot of success with that last season, but Kiani was 13 of 18 on the season with a long of 42 on field goals, 27 of 28 on extra points, total of 66 points. And he had 42 kickoffs for 2,455 yards with a 54.6 yard per kick average with 4 touchbacks. So that's a guy who definitely can help a team out. And I look forward to seeing what they do with their punt game. Because, obviously punting is very vital. It can win and lose games undercover for you. Looking at Bethune-Cookman, they return a pretty solid unit. They have a great return guy. Didn't have a great season last season, but they have a great return guy, which we'll get to. They return both their kicker and punter. And I will throw this disclaimer out here. I should have threw it out earlier. I throw it out anytime I do shows like this. Some teams have a 24 roster, and some teams still have a 23 roster. So, it takes a little extra leg work with them 23 roster to make sure guys haven't gone into the portal. I check Twitter, I check Instagram, so sometimes some of them slip through the cracks. So if a guy is on this list that has left, I take that. But, I can only work with what I can work with. So for the most part, I think I did a pretty solid job of finding people who weren't gone. So just like I always throw that disclaimer out there. But looking at Bethune-Cookman, they finished the season. With a net kickoff average of 34.3. They really kind of struggled with their kicking a little bit. They were fifth in field goals at 63%, 7 of 11 on the season. Extra points, they finished the season fifth at 24 or 25 for 96%. Their punting game was pretty solid. They had a net average of 34.3 on the season, which is like sixth place. Allowed 4.1 yards per punt return, which was which was the fourth highest. When you look at their punt average, the average per punt, they averaged 39.3 yards per punt. So not a bad unit. They considering the work that they put in terms of punting, they punted quite a bit last season. They actually punted the ball 66 times, which was the third most punts on the season. So they had a really active unit in terms of getting numbers because they struggled to move the ball. But their return game was pretty solid especially on kickoffs, 19.4 yards per return. That was fourth in the league. And then their punt return unit was not as good, 4.7 yards per return, which was 11th in the league. So not a lot there, but they have a great kickoff return guy in Darnell Dees. Last season didn't have a season I thought he would have. Finished the season with 296 yards on the season, 22.7 yards per return, and a long of 61 on 13 returns. That's a guy who can break it, at any time. So, sometimes it just doesn't open up for you. But, I think he's the guy who you always have to be aware of when you're kicking the ball off. Maybe you want to just sky kick it and make them fair catch it, maybe you want to boot it out the back of the end zone, whatever the case may be. Sometimes you want to just keep that ball out of his hands. They don't have anybody returning as a punt returner. Their kicking unit is pretty solid. Anthony Frederick, he had 47 points on the season, 1,934 yards, averaged 41.1 yards per punt, with a long of 62, 16 punts inside the 20, 8 50-plus yard punts. Cade Hector, he did the kicking and the kickoffs. He was 7 of 11 on the season, with a long of 45 on field goals, 23 of 24. Extra points for 44 points. And he also had 41 kickoffs for 2,166 yards, with a 52.8 yard average and 2 touchbacks. So not a bad unit. They did have a few things that they didn't do great, but they could only work with so much that they could do, especially when you punt the ball a gang of times. Next up is FAMU, and FAMU special teams has been spectacular the last couple of years. And, losing guys the previous year and getting new guys didn't really miss a beat, honestly. Their special teams unit was pretty solid. They were perfect on extra points last season, 49 of 49. They led the league in field goals as well, making 78% of their field goals, 11 of 14. They ranked fifth in net kickoff average at 39.4. They had a 59.9 yard average per kickoff, which led the league, and 28 touchbacks, which led the league. So it's kind of tough to get that yardage going when you can't really get a lot of returns in. So 28 touchbacks on 77 kickoffs is not a bad number. When you look at that punting unit, they allowed 1.9 yards per punt return. They averaged 42.4 yards per punt, which was second in the league, and their net average was second at 37.8. They didn't really give up much on punt returns, and they did a great job of actually punting the ball. They punted 51 times on the season, which would put them at ninth in the league. So that's like the fourth fewest, so they didn't, obviously this team had a really solid offense, so they were going to move the ball in any case, but their punting unit was solid. Their return game was pretty solid as well. Their kickoff returns averaged 18.7 yards per return with 1 touchdown. Their punt return unit averaged 14 yards per return, which was second in the league, with 1 touchdown. So they, again, another team who ended up with two return touchdowns on the season. They returned all their kickers. Trey Wilhoit, he averaged 44.2 yards per punt on 48 punts, had 2,122 yards, long of 62, 12 punts inside the 20, 15 50-plus yard punts. Cameron Gillis was 11 of 14 on field goals, with a longer 44, 49, or 49 on extra points, with 82 points. That's the most, pretty much most of any kicker on this list by far. Michael Smith, 76 kickoffs, 4,544 yards, 59.8 yard average, 28 touchbacks. Their return unit, it's gonna change. You're losing Marcus Riley as a return guy. He led the league in kickoff returns, 31 yards per return with a touchdown. And you're losing Jamari Sharif, who was 5th in the league in punt returns at 14.3 yards per return. But you have guys who are very capable. Kelvin Dean is the leading returning guy. I'm not saying he's gonna do the job, but he's the leading returning guy with 3 returns for 42 yards, along with 22. Jamari Gassett is the leading punt returner with 4 returns for 49 yards. That's a 12.2 yard average with a longer 39. So he's showing that he has the explosiveness. Again, they brought in a lot of guys. They return a lot of guys. FAMU has solid speed all over the field. So, those guys filling in those spots probably not going to be a big problem to find guys to fill those holes. It's only a matter of who. I mean, you get a transfer guy like Riley. who became the top return guy in the conference. So, it can happen for anybody on that team. That special teams unit is always top notch. So nothing new there. Grambling, they are gonna have some holes to fill in their kicking game. They lost their kicker and their punter. Jimmy Isles was their punter. I think he was a senior, so not surprised he left. But Tanner Rinker was like a freshman, and he went into the portal. So that was a surprise to me. But Luca Durate is the only guy who had any kicking experience coming back. He had 4 kickoffs for 209 yards, 52-yard average, no touchbacks. Joshua Jones had a pretty solid return game in kickoffs and punts, averaged 24.6 yards per kickoff return with a long of 77, 320 yards on 13 returns. He also had 8 punt returns for 125 yards, averaged 15.6 yards per return, and a long of 47. Looking at what they did as a team, they had a kickoff net average of 40.3, so they really did a good job of covering kickoffs. When you look at what they did with field goals, they were 7 of 13 for 53% on the season. Field goals, extra points, they were 33 of 36 for 91%, and they finished 4th in net punting at they finished 3rd in net punting at 36.3 yards per punt net, and they had a total average yardage of 41.2 yards per punt, which was also 3rd. Like I said, Jimmy Isles was a great punter for them. He finished. They allowed 4.2 yards per punt return, which was the 3rd most. So they did kind of struggle in getting stops on returns, but they had a really good kicking unit. They were 8th in kickoff returns at 16.9 yards per return, and they finished the season 6th in punt returns at 10 yards per return. So, like I said, they have some holes to fill on the kicking side of things. I think their return unit is pretty solid. Johnson had a very good season as a younger guy, so you kind of can expect to see him maybe do a little bit more and put up even better numbers on the season. He actually would have qualified for the punt return rankings, but I don't think he had enough returns on the season. Actually, he did. He was 4th at 15.6 yards per return. Moving on to Jackson State, this is a team who had some serious injury issues at this position, the likes of which I haven't ever really seen on a special teams unit, but they held strong. They really they kind of piecemealed some things, but I don't think it really affected them as much as it could have. I think some teams, having those kind of issues on a kicking unit could really hurt you and really put you behind the 8 ball, so to speak. But they were able to keep things going, and actually, they had a female kicker, Leilani Armenta, who came in and kind of helped out in reserve. But they had a very good group of guys and young lady to fill in those holes. But they averaged on the season, 35.9 yards per kickoff return net, 55.7. They had 14 touchbacks on the season. Field goals, they finished the season at 66%, which was 3rd, 10 of 15. Extra points. On extra points, they were 9th at 91%, 32 of 35. The punt unit finished 2nd. Well, let's see. They finished. They finished. They had the 2nd most punt return average at 5.1 yards per punt return. Their net average per punt was 9th at 32.2 yards per punt. and they averaged 38.5 yards per punt on the season, which was eighth. So not, the numbers aren't spectacular, but you can kind of see, what things changed on this team. The return game, they were 12th in kickoff returns at 15.3 yards per return, and they were ninth in punt returns at 8 yards even. But like I said, if you have that much attrition, it can really affect your numbers. But Matt Noel finished the season with a 44.3 yard per punt average, 34 punts, 1,507 yards longer, 65 on the season, 12 punts inside the 20, 10 50-plus yard punts. Dylan Watson finished 6 of 9 on extra points with a longer 46. On field goals with a longer 46, 17 of 18 on extra points, 35 points total. He also had 32 kickoffs for 1,842 yards, 61.5 yard average per kick with 6 touchbacks. Rico Powers led the team in kick returns with 11, 201 yards, 18.2 yard average, longer 29. And Isaiah Spencer had 1 punt return for 5 yards on the season. Moving on to Valley, the Delta Devils, their special teams unit. When you look at what they did this season, they were 7th in net kickoff average at 38.2 yards per kick. They finished with 5 touchbacks, which kind of puts them in the middle of the pack. At field goals, they were 11th at 5 of 13 for 38%. Extra points, they were last at 13 of 15 for 86%. When you don't score a lot of touchdowns, you're not going to kick a lot of extra points. So unless you go, 14 or 15 or 15 or 15, you're probably going to finish lower than most people. The punting unit, they averaged 31.8 yards per punt net, which was 10th. They averaged 35.9 yards per punt total, which was 11th. And they allowed 2.8 yards per punt return, which will put them at 7th place. So not a bad coverage unit. Their numbers are especially their kicking numbers in terms of kickoffs and in terms of kickoffs and field goals and extra points. Those numbers are low because they didn't really have a lot of attempts doing much. They kicked 13 field goals on the season, and then, like I said, they had 15 extra points. As my voice is like trying to do some crazy stuff, and they only kicked the ball off 31 times, which I believe was the fewest amount of kickoffs on the season. Yes, it was. Excuse me, my voice is just, I don't know, it just went haywire. They were 5th in punt and kickoff returns as a unit with 19.1 yards per return, and they were 7th in punt returns at 8.9 yards per return. Alexander Davis, he returns as the leading guy doing most things. He had 70 punts on the season, which, like I said, that's a tremendous amount of punts, and that showed when your offense can't really move the ball, and you have to punt a lot, you're gonna be pretty active as a punter. That Valley punted 75 times as a team last season, so they definitely did a lot of punting. He had 70 punts on the season for 2,565 yards. Average of 36.6 yards per punt. He had a long of 67, so really, really good boot right there. 10 kicks inside the 20 and 4 50-plus yard punts. He also was 2 of 7 on field goals with a long of 41, 10 of 11 on extra points with 16 total points. Again, team as a whole didn't really score a lot of points, so you're not going to see a lot of points from him. 16 kickoffs for 318 yards. 53.8 yard average, 1 touchback. Carrick Ross led the team in punt returns. He had 3 for 48 yards. He's the leading returning guy. 3 for 48, average of 16, longer 38. He also led the team in kickoff returns with 14 for 341 yards, 19.8 yard average with a longer 38. Moving on to Prairie View, they have a nice returning unit as well. Efren Jasso, he had 56 punts on the season for 2,216 yards, 39.6 yard average, 18 punts inside the 20, 10 50-plus yard punts. Carlos Villa Gomez, 8 of 15 on field goals with a longer 41. 22 or 23 on extra points for 43 points. He also had 25 kickoffs for 1,322 yards, 52.9-yard average, with no touchbacks. Marquise Doucette had 14 kick returns for 268 yards, with 19.1-yard average with a longer 55. And Cody Mayberry, two-point returns for 13 yards with a longer 13. I'm looking at the Panthers as a unit, what they did this past season. They finished the season averaging 35.8 yards per punt net, which was fourth. They averaged 38.8 yards per punt total, and they allowed 2 yards per punt return. So that's a pretty solid unit. Like I said, they didn't really have a great per punt average, seventh place in that, but they did a pretty solid job of stopping returns, which kept their net average pretty solid. They were third in extra points, 27 or 28 on the season for 96%. Field goals, they were 11 of 19 for 57%. That was eighth in the league. And kickoffs, their net average was 35.7, 53.1 total. Like I said, they only had one touchback on the season. Looking at the team as a whole in terms of returns, they finished ninth in kickoff returns at 16.8 yards per return, and they were 10th in punt returns at 6 yards per return total. So, again, another unit that wasn't really spectacular in the return game, but their kicking unit was pretty solid. And we returned both guys. They're only going to get better. So I think that this could be a viral unit for this offense, because, with a new offensive coordinator, new offense, new quarterback, you're going to have some spurts where your offense is not clicking consistently, and having a good punting unit is definitely going to help that. And a good field goal unit, can get you points when you cross, once you start to cross the 40-yard line, 35-yard line, you can start to, think about field goals. And you don't have to worry about going for it as much. Not necessarily saying you need to be kicking 45, 50-yard field goals consistently, but being able to kick 40-plus yard field goals is definitely a weapon that any unit will want. Next team we have on the list is Southern. And first and foremost, Southern is losing their punter. So when you're losing a guy who can really boot the ball, that's a very, very important weapon for your offense, especially when your offense struggles to move the ball. You can kind of, flip the field more often, pin the other team back, give your defense a chance to make more plays because the other team has to drive the ball longer down the field. So having a solid punting unit is very vital, and that helped Southern a lot offensively last season. They led the league in yards per punt at 43.6. They also led the league in net punting at 38.8. They gave up 3.6 yards per punt return, which was fifth. So even though they gave up a pretty solid punt return every time they punted the ball for the most part, but they did a good job of pinning teams back, and that helped a lot. They finished the season 10th in extra points at 30 of 33 for 90%. They were fourth in field goals at 63%, 7 of 11. They finished the season with a net kickoff average of 39.2 yards per kick, with a 58.4 yard average on kickoffs, which was second. And they had 24 touchbacks, which was also second. So they did a good job of kind of cutting down on some returns by, kicking the ball at the back of the end zone and making it tougher for teams to set up returns. The return unit for Southern, I love to call Southern almost team, because they had quite a few kicks where they almost returned for a big game, but, maybe a missed block here, guy fall down there. And it just leads to kind of long returns, but not really. They were 10th in kickoff returns at 16.7 yards per return. They did have a kickoff return for a touchdown, and they were fifth in the league in punt returns at 13 yards per return. on the season. And they also had a punt return touchdown on a block punt. So pretty solid there. Like I said, you're losing a really good punter in Robins Beauplan, Mr. Goldenfoot. But you returning Josh Griffin, who is a guy who's still coming into his own as a kicker. He was 7 of 11 with a longer 53 last season, 30 or 33 on extra points with 51 total points. He also is a very good kickoff guy. 49 kickoffs, 2,845 yards with a 58.1 yard average with 23 touchbacks. C.J. Russell led the team with 13 kickoff returns for 251 yards, 19.3 yard average with a longer 43. And Chandler Whitfield had 11 punts returned for 156 yards, 14.1 yard per return with a longer 43 as well. Moving on to Texas Southern, they finished the season third in extra points at they finished the season third in kickoff returns at 20.3 yards per return. Ladarius Owens was a big part of that. They lost their top return to injury. Owens stepped in and kind of filled the hole out. They were third in punt returns as well with 13.3 yards per return on the season. When you look at their kickoffs, they were third in net average at 39.7 and also 55.5 yards per kickoff on the season, which put them at seventh place. Field goal kicking, they were sixth at 11 of 18 on the season for 61%. Extra points, they were seventh in the league, 33 or 35 for 94%. Net punting average, they finished the season 33.6 yards per punt net, 36.3 yards per return total, which puts them at 10th place. And they allowed 2.3 yards per punt return, which was 8th. So again, kind of a mixed bag there. But they had some solid weapons on the return game. And Shanzavia Lewis, I know I butchered his name, I always do. He's a great kickoff return guy. Got injured last season, so didn't really get a lot of returns. But he averaged 17.2 yards per return on 7 returns with a longer 32. Trenton Leary had 10 punt returns for 190 yards, 19 yard average. 48 was his long. Christian Avalar had 3 punts on the season for 97 yards, averaged 32.3 yards per punt. They lost their punter. He had a longer 36. He had 2 punts inside the 20. No 50-plus yard punts. Gustavo Romero was 6 of 6 on field goal for 33 yards was his long, 13 of 15 on extra points, 25 total points, and he had 53 kickoffs on the season for 2,965 yards, 55.9 yard average, and 7 touchbacks on the season. And finally, the Golden Lions of Pine Bluff, they finished the season with a net kickoff average of 34.3. Which was 11th in the league. They averaged 57 yards per kickoff. So they really kind of had a rough go of it with returns. Field goals, they finished the season last at 2 of 9 for 22%. So not good at all. When your offense is struggling to move the ball and you get opportunity to get them points and you don't, that really hurts. Only making 2 field goals was by far the fewest in the conference last season. They were 21 or 22 on extra points for 95%. That was 6th place. Their punting unit, they punted the ball a lot, 78 punts on the season. That's by far the most. They averaged 39 yards per punt, which was 6th in the league, and their net average was 35.5, which was 5th in the league. They gave up 2.5 yards per punt return on the season. And their return unit, they were 2nd in the league in kickoff returns. They had 48 returns, which is the most in the league. and they average 20.6 yards per return. No touchdowns though for all those, for all those returns and great yardage. No touchdowns. That just goes to show you that returning touchdowns is not easy on kicks off punts. And when you look at their punt return unit, they were eighth at 8.4 yards per return. They did have a punt return on the season. They lose their kicker. They returned Trey Gliff, who is a kid who's been waiting his turn. He had one extra point on the season. Didn't attempt a field goal. He also had 4 kickoffs for 237 yards, a 59.3 yard average, no touchbacks. They returned Jeremy Baker, who was their punter. He punted about 76 times for 2,953 yards, had a 38.8 yard average with a long of 68. He did have 20 punts inside the 20 and 14 50-plus yard punts. Jewel Fletcher leads the team in kickoff returns and punt returns. He had 8 kickoff returns for 117 yards, 14.6 yard average, along with 21. And he had 5 punt returns for 22 yards, 4.4 yard average with 12 yards as long. So with that being said, man, that is just returning specialist. That completes our series as we went through offense and defense and our special teams. And I love special teams, so I always try to give them a little shine. And hope y'all enjoyed this. And we'll be back on Thursday with Spike Smoke, live 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, episode number 150. Again, getting ready for that college football to drop. Like I said, I'm on Xbox, gamertag, SWAC, one word. Hit me up, and we can make it happen. Like I said again, give me some time to work, though, man. Don't challenge me day one. Give me some time to get my feet up under me. But with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC, signing out. On the rebound. Peace.